Oh, I want to thank the great composer, young composer White Sand, for that music there today. It's called Eternity. Epic, dramatic, emotional, beautiful music. White Sand, all one word. The tune is Eternity. I use a lot of his music, as you'll notice in my videos, when I'm doing drone flying or when I'm doing events, you know, outside fire coverage, when we had the great Santa Rosa fire. And good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Nice to see all of you. This Hazel, nice to see you. Joe, Cobra, John, Nathan, RV Radio, Pam, Madison, Harvey, Darren. We got the big lobster prick. Oh, nice to see you in the house today. Hello, Cheryl. Sis Judy. Hello, Luna. I don't want to sound you know, welcome everybody to what I hope will be the first of many. You know, people always say, where's the content on YouTube? And I take pride that I think for a lot of years I've tried to bring a lot of content. I've done hundreds of restoration videos, audio, vintage audio listening experiences, audio rescues, where we go out and take the camera and we actually go out and rescue vintage pieces of audio equipment, saving them from trash dumps and preserving some of the great history of this country. Hello, Papa Grizz. Nice to see you. Thank you, Kathy. I understand you take a chance sometimes and you do things. This is probably my most narrow casted hangout. The reason is it's covering the subject it's near and dear to my heart. Probably RV Radio, certainly Harvey, De Niro, Staples, my moderator in here, and some people that just enjoy fascinating tales of daring do and legal struggles and suicides, and it can get pretty intense. The history of radio. I'm feeling good against the wind. The history of radio is a history that very few people even know in this country and around the world. But it's one of the most fascinating industries to my mind, because it was the first industry that really reshaped the world as we know it today by the immediacy of broadcasting. We were able to be instantly in touch with any news anywhere around the world. Think of what we had prior to that time. Think of what we had prior to that time. We had newspapers. Whenever something really extraordinary happened, let's test people's knowledge. What would the newspapers print? They would put a morning paper out. Maybe there would be an evening edition in big towns. And then I grew up in Baltimore. We had the Baltimore Sun and we had the News American. We had two newspapers that would compete. But once in a while, the only way that they had, hey, Bully, the only way they had to communicate some real bit of breaking news was to do what? Anybody know out there? All my history buffs? Anybody out there? Should I give a prize? They would. I'm going to wait a second. Thank you, Hazel. I hope you're doing good, honey. Well, the telegraph was good too, but not everybody had a telegraph in their home, Harvey. Very few people. This was before radio. This is before telegraph. Newspapers would print what was called an extra. Hey, Line Screw, how are you? The problem with the telegraph is, number one, you had to know that A was dit da, B was dot dit dit dit, C was dot dit da, E was dit, F, and right on down the line. You had to know Morse code. Now, the average person in the average home didn't know Morse code, did they? So they depended on a telegraph. If it was news that was immediate to them, you know, a death in the Civil War or something like that, that news might be telegrammed, but more often was the case a soldier would come to bring that news. But maybe somebody had a baby, somebody died, you would get a telegram, and oftentimes you would dread opening the door and seeing a telegram kid there on a bike, because you knew it probably wasn't real great news. And the time I remember telegrams in my life is just a little aside, when my mother had inherited a little bit of stock in a company called Piper Cub. You've probably heard of Piper Cub. How you doing, Colleen? Piper Cub was a manufacturer, and still is, I believe, in some subsidiary. It's a subsidiary of small planes. And another company wanted to take that company over. So they started making offers for stocks. And a series of telegrams started arriving at a house saying, one would be from Piper Cub saying, don't sell that stock. Okay. And the other side is trying to buy the company, would send a telegram and say, we're now upping our offer to $50 or whatever a share. And Piper Cub would send a telegram the next day. It was insane. But you got to remember, when I was young, there was no transistors. Okay, when I was born, there was no such thing as transistor radios. They were still in an experimental phase. Everything was what Harvey would call valve radios, and what we would call here vacuum tube radios. When I was born, there was no such thing as stereo broadcasting over the air, believe it or not. In other words, you could only have one channel that was mono, no stereo. They hadn't figured out how they could send two different channels, left and right side, from a radio station. How in the hell do you do that? We got one frequency, 101.9. How in the hell do we get two channels to people on one frequency? You can understand why I think radio is such a fascinating place and such a fascinating thing to discover, because there was so much struggle. There were so many lawsuits that the guy that originated FM, what we know as FM today, ended up committing suicide, because the legal bills and the tangle was so horrific and so draining of him that he ended up committing suicide. You know, that in itself, that knowledge, hello, Brown Bear, that knowledge and things about Tesla and things about Edison stimulated, before Edison made this big resurgence, and I mean before Tesla made this big resurgence in the last 20 years, and Edison started to be pushed down. Remember, when we're kids and we're in history class and we're studying American history, particularly when I was a kid, there were no negatives surrounding great Americans, right? I mean, the textbooks, the history we learned, hi Lisa, was all it was all, it made good reading, but half of it was bullshit. And it's only until we got to the 60s and the 70s and people started rewriting history and looking at the real history of America, the truth started to come out about these people like Edison. Up until about 1980, you would never hear a whisper of negativism about Thomas Edison. And now he was a slob. He was an egomaniac. He was a cheater. He was a villain in a lot of ways, but yet he was a very great inventor. But he was not the person that we think of when we were taught history, when we didn't even, most of us never even heard of Tesla. The only way we really ever came to know about Tesla was because of when Tesla's weakest and worst moments, George Westinghouse came and made an offer for his assets in his business. That's why Tesla disappeared, because it was all absorbed. All of that history was absorbed. So when you start tearing into the history of radio, starting with people like Edison, they had no friggin' idea when they were working in their laboratories what the next day would bring in terms of discoveries. Thomas Edison never had a formal education. Nikola Tesla was a well-educated electrical engineer. Yet, Thomas Edison was glad to take on Tesla as his protege because he knew he lacked that sort of electronics knowledge and theoretical stuff that Tesla had. And they started to work together, and of course the friction begins, right? Big egos, right? Here's this kid, this immigrant to the United States in Tesla's laboratories in Menlo Park. And it's driving Edison crazy, because Tesla wants to do this. Tesla's got an idea that direct current, as opposed to alternating current that we use, is better. So Edison makes the promise, hey, I'll pay you $50,000 if you can develop a practical applications for AC. For AC power, even though Edison was like, this Tesla's really this guy, right? So Tesla came to him and solved some of the most vexing problems that Edison could never solve. And what did Edison do? What did Edison tell Tesla? He told Tesla, hey, I was just joking. You think I'm paying you $50,000? He said to him, son, you're an immigrant to the United States. And one day, maybe you'll understand what an American joke is. Hi, how you doing, Richard? I mean, can you imagine that? So Tesla leaves just confounded, dumbfounded. He finds some invention. He finds some backers and goes on an invention spree. Well, he kind of disappears from, the world of what Thomas Edison's were. He's got his own fish to fry with power distribution. And him and Edison, good afternoon, Lynn. Him and Edison just went at it, but from a distance with each other. And we know the war of the currencies, the war of the currents that broke out. between these two guys, because, you know, Edison had the idea that direct current was safer, the voltages were lower, and the chances of being killed were very small. Tesla believed if you handled AC, alternating current, correctly, then you would be much more efficient in the distribution of power. Under Edison's plan to electrify New York City, was where he started. They gave him a block and said, electrify this. Well, within that square mile or whatever the hell it is, you had to have big power generating. You had to power boosting to boost up the currents were being lost in the transmission wires. Tesla's idea was through alternating current, you had a much more efficient power and you didn't have to waste any of that. You know, pick up your power brick on your computer. Why do you think it's warm? Because it's converting to, you know, it's converting to that DC power. So DC power is not very, you know, it's good in a lot of ways because it's a lot safer. So Edison hated that idea so much. Kelly, he hated Tesla so much that every time one of Tesla's experiments, you know, Edison would take out big advertisements in the paper, the New York newspapers and stuff. Every time somebody got killed with an experiment, you know, a horse would be coming down the street on a wet day and all of a sudden the horse and rider would be electrocuted. Well, that's the danger. Edison would paint these pictures to people. You're going to have, you know, because of an unfortunate accident here and there, he painted a picture of death and destruction if alternating current ever made it into the streets and homes. It would be like actually like the devil killer in your home. So it's an amazing story, and it's an amazing story of big egos back then. It's also a story of big dreams. How do we send a signal across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean? People like Marconi, the Italian wireless inventor. How in the hell do we do that? How in the hell do we make a signal so strong that it'll reach halfway around the world? You're going to understand the engineering problems are proved. That's it, Darren, the elephant that Edison killed. There were all kinds of, I mean, I'm surprised Hollywood, it's just Hollywood could never get the right angle on how to present one of the most rough and tumble histories in the world, which was the history of early electricity, the history of early electronics, the history of early radio. You know, telegraphy was simple. You just close the circuit, you open the circuit, right? I mean, there's nothing super complicated about that. It's an electromagnet that when you put current on it, when current appears, it just closes the circuit. And then when you let up on the other end, it opens it. But radio, hello, Monique. The thing that strikes me too about early radio is this thing that strikes me about a lot of things in inventions. One of the things that always fascinated me as a child was getting these books out of the library called Great Inventors. And one of the constant themes that ran through this book was, as hard as these people worked to invent something, more often than not, what happened? What happened that really put the invention over the top? It was sometimes some mysterious outside force. What happened? And they called it an accident. Think about some of the most powerful inventions. Thank you, Dawn. Think of some of the most powerful inventions that some of the most amazing discoveries in the world And think of how many of them were by accident. You know, Charles Goodyear's so frustrated that he can't turn rubber into a hard product that can be used with, you know, make rubber useful. And what happens? The guy accidentally drops some on a heated stove. Bingo. Vulcanized rubber. I mean, that guy could have sat there for 10 more years. And just beat his head till he finally put a hole in the wall, and he would have been no closer to it. Oh yeah, Susie says if time travel was legit, wouldn't you want to go backwards or forward? I'd put myself right back to about the 1880s, because to me that was the most rip-roaring fascinating, from 1880 to about 1937. But anyway, think about penicillin. You know, they're screwing around. You take care, Kathy. They're screwing around in a laboratory, Fleming, for years. All of a sudden, accidentally, some bread that they left out developed a mold that just, wow, look at this. The hell is that? Sometimes I wondered when I was young if this was accidents or this was miracles. You know, like gifts from the great beyond. You dare say God, and once in a while I'll throw you a bone. And I always kind of held that concept in my head, because when it came to early radio, you know, there was plenty of terrific accidents that were lucky accidents that occurred, or things that people observed that had nothing to do with the work that they were doing. But yet so many inventors I read, so many of these great histories of invention, be like, wow, okay, well, he invented that, but you know, you were friggin' lucky, mate. You know, Marie Curie with the early radioactive substances accidentally discovered. There's so many things that are just accidents. That it always fascinates me in life, and it's particularly apropos for the early stages of radio. There were people tinkering around since the 1820s, 1830s, were messing around in laboratories in Germany and the UK, and in college and university laboratories, and in you know, engineering firms in the United States, trying to understand the usefulness of electricity. And of course, Thomas Edison is the one that gets all the press, but he's also one of those that his reputation has become lowered. Hey, Craft Beer Pours, nice to see you, Brandon. Because the true history starts to come in. I often wonder myself, is the true history a disincentive to people? You know, in other words, is idealized history a better thing to hand down through civilization? Or is the true, you know, which is better for civilization, a glorified history of somebody like I learned in grade school about Thomas Edison? And those were the days where we stood up every morning, pushed our chairs in, put our hands over to our heart, and pledged allegiance to the flag. Thank you very much. So I often wonder myself, you know, if sometimes memorializing things isn't better for incentivizing, but being factually correct is something too. And the thing you don't know about Thomas Edison, many of you don't work excuse me, don't, you're not, we all know cursory history. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Thomas Edison invented the phonograph. Thomas Edison had the first motion picture, developed the really first motion picture studio. But the guy was a SOB to work with in every sense of the way, because he only slept, he's like me, he sleeps about 4 hours a night, but he was fucking grumpy. I wake up happy. He'd do his cat naps and wake up and raise hell in the laboratory. He was never formally educated. So just about everything that he did in the laboratory was just have a thought, try it out, fail, have another thought, try it out, fail. So he would end up, when they say inventing the light bulb, there'd been a lot of people that invented the light bulb. It invented a light involving electricity, but they could never solve the problem how to make it practical and lasting. Edison never invented the light bulb. He perfected the light bulb, but he didn't perfect it because he used a bunch of mathematical and electrical formulas. He invented it because he tried every substance known to man and eventually wound up with something practical that worked. Just like so you think to yourself, this was just a sweatshop he had, just a lot of different directions. Every time he would have a thought, his mind, he just started a new branch, got the guys working on this and doing that. So his mind was like an exploded mess. He was all over the place. But people like Tesla, no problem. People like Tesla were very focused on very specific problems to do. Well, one day in the laboratory in 1875, they're working on this light bulb, trying to get this light bulb going. And they're burning a piece of bamboo inside of a vacuum tube. They're heating up this piece of bamboo inside. It's glowing and it's emitting light. They're pretty excited about the bamboo, but a big problem occurs. They notice as this is burning, that carbon, little bits of black, are flying off of the bamboo. You can hardly even see them, and they're attaching themselves to the inside of the glass tube. One of the assistants to Edison noticed this and said, well, there must be something outside that's pulling these carbonization to the outside of the bulb. Now, the genius of Edison, and this was the only thing that Edison ever really, the only thing I give Thomas Edison credit for, the only true genius insight he had, but it was a critical one because it was the whole basis of the radio industry. Was he told his assistant, I don't think that carbon black, was blackening the outside of it was blackening the inside of the tube. So if the longer the bamboo burned, the darker it got. It just basically became a black tube with something glowing inside. And Edison said, I don't think that that's just randomly coming off. I think that there's some type of charge that's pulling that towards the glass. Well, you might think something so small and so trivial would be almost just a notation on a notebook, but it became the whole foundation for the radio industry that we have today. Because Edison had discovered what was called the Edison effect, and he patented. He didn't understand, but what he did in observing this buildup on the glass tube of his light bulb, he decided to put another little piece of wire inside the tube and hook up a measuring meter. And he found out through open space from this burning filament of bamboo to the little wire he had on the side of the tube on the inside, there was actually current passing through. There was electricity passing through it. Nobody until that time ever had the slightest inkling of a thought that electricity could move through the air, that current could flow through a vacuum in air. Well, Edison patented that, and he didn't think a lot about it because, like I said, his focus was this freaking light bulb. But he accidentally discovered the foundation of modern radio and the vacuum tube. See, until the vacuum tube came about and was developed, and we'll talk a little bit about the history because this is the early days. Any attempts at radio, you had to send a little signal or something to hook two pieces of wire and maybe telegraphs on the end. You needed ways to boost that signal with big storage batteries along the way. If you wanted to run a telegraph thousands of miles, you had to have hundreds of stations along the way to boost that signal up, that telegraph that was going across the nation. I mean, that took a lot of expense, and there was a lot of cost and a lot of maintenance and upkeep to develop that. You know, you can imagine every couple miles you need to have a booster to boost up. This signal comes in, you got to reshoot it up again to a big amplify. It goes another 10 miles, it starts to degrade, then you got to amplify it up again. Yeah, I'm just saying, Susie says, are you saying it was almost an accident, Rosie, a discovery of radio? Like so many things in our world, yes, I say it was almost a discovery. People knew about electronic particles, people knew about telegraphy, but they didn't know about how currents move through vacuums and things. And it quite by accident, another accident, that it was discovered. Pretty fascinating when you think about that. Now, Harvey, I'm going to go ahead at this point in time. I'm going to reach up here. I think we're connected here. I'm going to send you a link over here. I think you're somewhere on here because Harvey's one of my radio buddies, and we can talk. I'm not sure if I got you on here or not, Harvey. If you put your Gmail on the side, I might be able to add you. Let me see if I can add you right here. Yeah, I got you here, Harvey. I'm going to go ahead and add you right here. Okay, because Harvey found me through the Vintage Audio community. Like I say, it's a very small community. And for those of you who are used to seeing more general topics, I'm not really apologizing, but I say I understand if you click off. This is just one of these sort of narrow casts, but I do want to put content up that we can discuss this type of thing. So I got a board here. I'll get Harvey on here, and we'll talk about a couple things that make, with the development of what we know as a vacuum tube. And I have one sitting over here. Let me see. I got a few over here sitting around. You probably saw these when I was a kid. This was all we had. Little vacuum tubes. And I'm sure many of you in your life saw these things sometime and said, what the hell are these things? And I was little, and I'm sure many of you in your life saw these. Yeah, hi, Harvey.
Hi, can you hear me, Rosie?
Yeah, nice to hear you. Welcome aboard, Harvey. I'm really honored that you came on today.
My pleasure, and hi on side chat, everyone. I don't think I've ignored anybody there. No, I don't think I have, actually. No, I think I said hi to everybody.
Yeah, Harvey is one of my actually found me through the vintage audio and restoration. Harvey's particular passion
sure did.
Reel to reel. He does a lot of work with reel to reel. I think that's like a passion of yours, Harvey. There, but you enjoy restoration, and as you say, there's not a lot in the UK to be restored.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
See, a lot of people don't, because this country is so damn bloody small. A lot of people don't throw things out, so you need to buy stuff on eBay.
Yeah, so that's where a lot of stuff ends up. At Harvey, in the the UK was really instrumental. It was one of the really big stepping stones for the development of radio, with a guy named Fleming there. And we're gonna backtrack a little bit. We'll get to Fleming, but he was really a critical guy.
Right. Damn phone. Sorry, it's my bloody phone now. Oh God, hang on a minute.
Yep. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and handle that. I'm gonna be right back in a minute.
Sorry about this.
Yep.
Shut up, phone. I'll put it on silent. Hang on. Oh, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Right. Oh, thanks, Susie. That's really nice of you. See, thing is, what I try to do on everybody on YouTube, I try to be nice to everybody, because the way I look at it, if you're nice to people, you get niceness back. This is why I don't like all this drama stuff. Who needs it? I certainly don't.
All right, Harvey.
Thanks, Susie.
Am I doing justice to the topic so far here?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll tell you what, because I've studied Tesla and Edison as well for years and years, and I practically know everything about them. And what you've actually been saying, it's like if you've been reading from a script, but it's coming all from your head, spontaneously. Fantastic. Well done, Rosie.
Yeah, and don't you think, Harvey, that it's also one of the most fascinating histories in the world is the history of radio?
Absolutely, 100%.
Because television was just really a spin-off of radio with just a different type of vacuum tube that would transmit images instead of necessarily sound. But Tesla's a very fascinating person, Carrie, very fascinating type of person.
Very intelligent.
But Harvey, we're going to go to class for a minute here now, okay?
Right.
We're going to go to Blackboard here. And I'm just going to put myself on present. Because, well, let's back up a minute. Harvey, early telegraphy was very consumptive of power. One of the big issues they had was when you, as I said, when you went to transmit a signal from, say, Washington, D.C. to London, England, you would have to have some type of repeater. Well, that was later in the distance, transatlantic, but I'm saying, just say across America from Washington, D.C. to St. Louis, Missouri. You can imagine with all those miles of copper wire that telegraph signal had to carry on. What would happen, Harvey, under the Ohm's law, E equals I times R, the more distance you have to travel over that copper, what happens? The resistance
increases, and signal loss.
Yeah, big time signal loss, right? Yep. Simple Ohm's law, the basis of all electricity theory is. as the resistance of carrying that signal has to fight its way through miles and miles of copper lines, the power of the signal starts to decline. So what do they have to do, Harvey? They have to put boosting batteries along the way to take that signal and re-amplify and send that along. Well, let me tell you, brother, that's costly. That's costly, and it required a lot of maintenance, and it required a lot of power generation along the way. It was very, you know, it was great, but it was a very high cost to do that. Telegrams were extremely expensive back then, just because of the cost that and the capital expenses that Western Union had to stick into, you know, keep things keep things going. But the amplifier, the tube, that was really the thing that solved that problem, and it allowed transmission to become much more efficient. So we'll go to the board here. Harvey, you understand what I was talking about, the Edison effect here.
Yeah.
You know, when he had that, and I'll put myself on present here. Let me grab this thing here. We'll put handsome Harvey to the side here for a minute. There we go. Harvey, you can't help it being handsome, you know. Anyway.
Oh, you're too kind, Rosie.
There's the this is Edison's early light bulb here, and there's the bamboo filament in it. And when he noticed, his laboratory assistant noticed that as this burned, you know, they put the power, they put a current to this bamboo and caused it to get red hot and start to glow, which created the light. As this burned, what happened, Harvey? That carbon began to gather inside of the glass there.
Right. Yeah.
And they were baffled in that laboratory. They couldn't figure out for the life of them what was causing that. You know, the average person would think that the carbon would just, gravity would exert a force and it would just fall down to the bottom of the base of the bulb. But instead, it rose and started to coat that black on the inside of the glass. So what did Edison do? He put another wire inside of the glass tube. He created another vacuum in there. He sealed that wire, and he hooked up a measuring device, an early voltmeter across there. And what he noticed, that there was actually current from here was seeming to travel through space with nothing connecting it and going through that voltmeter. That was a really, you know, Harvey, that Edison effect is the basis of everything that we have today.
That's right.
He didn't do anything with that, but it was a scientist called Fleming.
Yeah, Alexander Fleming.
Yeah, that started a very, very great inventor and a highly successful one too. Okay, and he liked to be a, you know, he'd like to be a superstar in inventing. This guy Fleming studied Edison's device because Edison didn't think of any practical application for that. He thought that's interesting, you know, so what? Okay, so we now know that electricity can flow through a vacuum. Well, Harvey, you can explain a rectifier to people, basically what it does. If you're going to rectify AC current, what are you going to do to it?
Right, what you got to do, you got to actually, well, a rectifier is commonly known as a diode. And the earlier rectifiers were tube-based, and what they do, they allow current to flow in one way only, not the other way. So
what he discovered here was that he could actually create, as AC current came in to this bulb, was fed across this vacuum tube, the cathode and a plate. As the current would alternate and go from positive to negative, this positively, they just put a positive charge on this plate. Every time this current alternated to the positive side here, it was blocked from coming over because positive and positive repels each other, right? So
Yep.
only the negative part of the alternating current would go through, and it would cut off the top part of the alternating current signal, and it would create a smooth DC flow.
Waveform, yeah.
Yeah, it would take a waveform and flatten that, so only half of the wave went through, and it would no longer alternate, it would be direct current. This was called the Fleming valve.
That's it.
And it was the first device that could transform alternating current to direct current. Therefore, you could have much safer applications. Today, what do we have, Harvey? 19 volts in computers. We have 12-volt wiring systems.
Yep.
You don't want to have AC. You know that little amplifier I have out there? Yep, that's it, Carl. It was the first proof that electrons move to the positive side. It's very important.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because working with DC power is much safer in application. So almost everything you see behind me on the wall here, virtually everything, is converting that AC into usable DC power in there. That's much safer and lower voltage, and it's efficient too. Okay.
You know what I found? There was some really early radios. I was working on a British radio called a Bush, and I think it was quite popular around about the early 1950s. And the only trouble with that is it's got a live chassis, so you got to be really careful with these live chassis.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This is the one I have out there that I've used with this. I did a recent restoration of a Kenwood KT 5300 tuner, but you have to use an amplifier with it. So I use that little True Test 5. It's probably the most dangerous thing I have in the shop, that teeny little tiny amplifier, because it's power, it's direct power, it's AC into the unit.
Yeah.
You can get killed with that.
Absolutely.
You know, so reducing things to DC power and stripping off the DC component with direct current was very, very critical. And this is where Edison, this is the whole battle of where Edison and Tesla went at it, right here. Because Edison believed in the beauty of DC power, and he's probably right to some extent today, okay? Because they, and everything we use is low voltage devices now and micro circuits. I mean, direct current's critical. But Tesla wanted alternating currency because of the efficiency in being able to move gigantic amounts of power. And of course, George Westinghouse went and bought all the patents of Tesla to give him some money. And he went and founded, what was it, that power station on Niagara Falls that was the first alternating current with the hydroelectric power.
So that's the one.
That proved the value of Tesla. Now, Alan D, there were lawsuits galore, and this is the thing to remember. At each step from this point forward with Fleming here, and when we get to the next step with DeForest in the United States, the lawsuits started flying fast and furious in this area here. Okay. Next, a guy named DeForest came along, Lee DeForest, in the United States, and he studied Fleming's rectifier, his device, his diode for allowing just only positive or negative current through a device. And he started to experiment with that. And he created really what truly became the first amplifier. And this was the first real practical application that allowed us to have radio. It allowed us to have more efficient telegraphy, more efficient telephone usage. What DeForest worked on and discovered was that by putting a plate or a collecting point inside of the vacuum tube, he discovered that by putting a small amount of power, by inputting a small amount of power into the vacuum tube, that you got a much bigger, but putting a small signal in, you got a much more enormous signal came out on the plate, or what they call the plate side here. This was an incredible breakthrough, and it allowed first amplification. Nobody knew that when injecting a small signal into this tube, that it would be tremendously magnified, in some cases by a factor of 3, 4, 5, 10. So it became a tremendous way to boost his signal. And what he did to control that signal was he developed the first use of something that's called a grid that you could put in there, which was like, he called it a grid. It was short for a gridiron because it reminded him of an American football field. You could put what was called a grid in here, and you could vary the charge on that grid from positive to negative, and you could control the flow of electrons from the cathode or heated part to the plate part that was the collector. Now, I'm not going to get complicated here, but this is absolutely critical stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you could vary this, you could vary the output and the strength of the signal. So it was quite a good invention. Well, of course, Fleming saw what DeForest did, and he didn't like it. And this is where the lawyers all started to get involved in this whole process. And Fleming coming in and saying DeForest didn't really invent anything new. He just piggybacked on the top of my technology. And man, the lawyers started to get involved. But this is the really critical thing for early radio, for telegraphy. Now, after he developed this first amplifier where a small signal could be injected in and a tremendously larger signal resulted out of it, that was the most exciting thing to practical people, is that a small signal could be exponentially multiplied and enlarged. So you had a tiny little, maybe something coming in off of a crystal radio, right, Harvey? Something really micro voltage could be fed in. That tiny little signal could go in to this, and the result would be a tremendously amplified signal coming out. That was huge.
And it's funny though, it's funny though, Rosie, what a lot of people don't realize is when when you pick up radio signals, I mean, literally the power and the vowels and stuff like that is only for the amplifier section, but you can literally, hence like the early crystal sets, you could listen to radio signal just via the power of the electromagnetic waves. That's what you was listening to without any
exactly. Early crystal sets had been in common use, but people were very frustrated because the signals were so tiny.
Oh, right.
That you had to, you're screaming into people in the room, be quiet, I can't hear, you're
damn headphones.
You're mucking up my listening. And you would have people DXing or trying to hear signals from far away. They had no process to apply and amplify that. Now they could take that tiny little signal from a crystal radio into the headsets. They can feed it into a tube, an amplifier tube, and have it very enlarged when it came out the plate side. And from that enlarged signal, they could modify it. I'm not going to get into complexities of some of the things that, I'm no artist, that's for darn sure. I'm not good. But you get the basic point from Edison through, discovering that you could shave an alternating current and create a direct one. And then discovering, with the use of this same tube, putting heat to it here, this cathode, that it would start to shoot off electrons that would be gathered by this plate. If these were, negative electrons, they would be attracted by the positive plate up here, voltage, because positive and negatives attract. But if you wanted to control the flow of those electrons moving up to this positive plate, all you had to do was increase a positive signal on this grid, and it became sort of a repelling device that would keep those electrons from moving up. It would reduce the flow of the electrons and therefore decrease, well, in a real raw way, like decrease the volume.
Yeah.
And then to allow to turn this grid more positive would allow more electrons to shoot through and be collected by the positive. Very fascinating, very brilliant people we're talking about here.
I know.
Now, at this stage, the story gets very interesting because Fleming's amplifier, he knew it had use to it because he knew that you could boost up a signal and, you know, you could potentially get something that you might be able to hear with the naked ear. But the problem was he could not make a good enough tube. Okay, he's just one guy working in a laboratory with a few assistants. He doesn't have a lot of resources to improve it. Yeah, I'm just saying, Carl, for the early, without people that use, I'm just using crystal. Carl says actually they didn't have crystal radio sets. They were working with static charges being amped. They needed tubes to transmit. I meant just using, imagine if you had a signal like a crystal radio and you were trying to hear that like I did when I was a kid. You have to have really good ears, and you have to, you know, you have to have headphones on and all. I just used that. This did away with the need for that type of, you know, you could take a crystal radio signal and feed it into an amplifier and get a much larger output that you could control with a little gateway, like gates on a dam, that you could open or close to allow more amplification to occur. Isn't that brilliant? Absolutely brilliant process. But like I say, Harvey, the real problem with this was that he could not create, he did not have the wherewithal to create, you know, a better product. So what do you think he did? Okay, I'm going to tell you what he did. Maybe Carl knows what. Let's see if Carl knows. Let's see if Carl knows what.
What was the question again, Rosie?
Yeah, what did Fleming do? You know, his amplification was not magnificent. It was enough to measure, but he could never really get a huge gain in output. So what did he do? With his limited resources, he knew he wasn't getting the maximum efficiency out of this device because he couldn't create a good enough vacuum.
Oh yeah, wait a minute. That was what did he do?
What do you do if you don't have the resources to do it yourself? What do you start to do? You start shopping around your idea, right? You go to where the money is.
Yeah, I think it was Westinghouse. I think went to
Western Electric.
Yeah.
Western Electric. DeForest approached Western Electric, which was the manufacturing arm of American Telephone and Telegraph, and he said, look what I got here. I got something that seems to take a small signal and make it greater. And of course, what do you think AT&T said? Damn, okay, we're developing early telephones here, but we have no idea how to really boost the signal. We don't want to use a ton of batteries and power generating taps along the way to boost the signal on a telephone. It's the same problem as a telegraph, right, Harvey?
Yep, absolutely.
Explain to people, Harvey, what the problem is, even with telephony and telegraphy.
Well, the early ones were the early form of telegraphy was, as I said, as you were saying before, you know, you had that massive signal loss all the way. It's like when Edison, he wanted, he wired up Wall Street with DC currents, which was ridiculous because they had to have transformers every few miles or so. And that's why Tesla had the idea of AC currents, which could travel thousands of miles without any transformers. Yeah.
Well, in this particular case, though, we need to talk about, you know, with the telegraphy and with the telephony, the signal loss was great on
they had to boost it. Yeah, they had to boost
it was great because it had to travel through miles and miles of wire, and the longer a signal travels through wire, the more power it loses because it's like swimming. It takes energy for those electrons
and resistance from the wire.
As those electrons travel, they start to lose some along the way. Their buddies start to drop off. You know, they can't finish the race, and very few come through. So AT&T's manufacturing arm, Western Electric, was very interested in this for telephony, because they were experiencing that same problem with early telephone systems. You had to have massive additional power stations and boosters along the way to take telephone voice signals and transmit them great distances. So when Fleming came in with this idea, the guys at Western Electric were like, yeah, okay, turn this over to us. You know, turn this over to us and let us work on it in our laboratories here at Western Electric. Well, what they were able to do, they looked at DeForest's tube and they said, your idea is good, but your tube is junk. Okay, because you're not making a good enough tube. And they said, sign over these rights, do this and that. And, you know, DeForest was happy. He became a very wealthy guy. You can believe he got plenty of stock in AT&T and everything else, enough that he was able to go out and continue doing other things. He's really considered the father of modern radio. Yeah. Western Electric was able to take this tube and create a tube that had a great vacuum. And all of a sudden, Western Electric was able to realize the great gains that this amplifier tube could produce.
I mean, they just refined the technology, really, didn't they?
They took the idea from him and from Edison and just refined it with a better vacuum, with better materials for a cathode to produce a flow of electrons and across this open vacuum and be collected by this plate up here. Better plate material, better cathode material, maybe a better grid. And all of a sudden they were realizing those excellent gains in output. And hence, you now had the ability to take a small signal and create a very large signal with it. What did this mean for radio? You could be in a studio broadcasting a radio program, and you could be putting out a small, very, like Harvey said, the signals that are captured by microphones, they're tiny, right, Harvey? They're just infinitesimally smaller, your microvolts, you know, right, of a signal. So you have to take that tiny signal and make that big enough that it's going to now carry through the air and be blasted, in some cases, hundreds of miles away. That's what this amplifier tube was able to do on the transmitting end from broadcast stations, and on the receiving end by allowing people to turn up volume by varying this grid across this amplifier tube by reducing or increasing the flow of electrons here. They could increase or lower their volume and start to use things like speakers instead of headphones, and be able to have telephones that you could actually hear on without having to be in a soundproof booth. It was pretty amazing.
Oh, brilliant.
Brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant.
And this is the whole basis of early radio. Oh, there we go, Beryl. You thought it was a biology class.
It's funny though, a lot of people don't realize on their early telephones, the microphone was actually filled up full of carbon granules.
Yep.
And you had a little diaphragm on top. And as the sound waves hit the diaphragm, it's to cause varying resistance in the carbon granules that produce the varying voltages.
You know, when this, thank you, Nippy. You know, when this came down, Harvey, and this is where the lawyers came in, and you know, let's face it, the bigger a technological breakthrough is, the more people want to have their fingers into it. Would you agree with that, Harvey? The bigger the concept, the bigger the breakthrough, man, all of a sudden, instead of one guy working in this laboratory, it's going to be like, oh man, no good invention is an orphan, right, Harvey? You got hundreds of people that now claim, I did the early work on this, and Fleming came in there and went after DeForest and went after AT&T and Western Electric Laboratories. And it wasn't until almost 30 years later that the Supreme Court held that DeForest and Western Electric did not violate the patents of Fleming. But I cannot tell you how much money they had to spend on various levels of appeal and case in these patent courts. This is what I say, the patent, I don't know how it is in the UK, Harvey, but in the United States, the patent courts are probably the least known court system to most Americans, but they're one of the court systems that has the most impact on the financial side of what happens in the world. So, you know, you had all of these legal entanglements over, you know, over whose patent is whose and who had the originating technology. But at least now you see the basis of how radio and broadcast radio could develop. Because without a vacuum tube, it would have been virtually impossible to transmit a signal any further than maybe across the room.
Yeah, it's funny though, you know, it's like the history of TV as well, television. I mean, there was Baird, and he had his mechanical system of television, and there was, I think it was, who was it? No, who was it? EMI or somebody. They had the electrical form TV, didn't they? And Baird, and oops, some of them. And I think they did an experiment at Alexandra Palace in London, not far from me, funny enough. They had two studios set up, one transmitting mechanical TV and one using electronic TV. And, you know, obviously, you know who won. The electronic side of things. So Baird, you know, he was just put by the wayside. That was it for Baird.
Yeah, now let's backtrack a little bit, because I do have Harvey on here. Harvey, let's engage in a little bit of discussion about, because I don't know if you followed my I don't know if you followed my thesis that when we write history, particularly years ago, we tended to be somewhat, we became rectifiers or diodes ourselves in writing history. You know, we tended to cut off the bottom part and keep the top part. You know, about I had no inkling when I was a child through high school and even through college that Thomas Edison was anything less than a great guy who was a little hard of hearing, that invented a lot of shit in a laboratory in New Jersey and became the foundation for General Electric Corporation that we know today. But it's really a different story. You know, and it's the same thing about when you start hearing about other great Americans of that era. And I don't know if you ever studied Henry Ford, Harvey. Certainly everybody's heard of the Ford Motor Car Company. But I was listening to Cooper's Hangout last night, and he was talking a little bit about the roots of the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany and anti-Semitism that occurred in Germany. And he was talking about the Treaty of Versailles, which was a failure. I mean, it was sticking Germany with tremendous. Hi, Lisa. I'm doing great, baby. How's your day going?
Hi, Lisa.
You know, and he was debating. I thought it was fascinating. It was interesting to listen to him talk about how Germany getting it stuck to it after World War I really created the seeds of World War II. But it still doesn't, you know, what few people in this country know, though, is that Henry Ford was one of the guys that really fanned the flames of anti-Semitism. And it's a story that you'd never hear told when you study history. And it's another part of what I say, history is also like a rectifier, Harvey. That's the good stuff through for the top, at least old history, and it truncates or cuts off the bottom part of Because I don't know if you ever knew the dark side of Henry Ford. Did you, Harvey?
I think I saw some program on TV about him, but I'll tell you what, enlighten me a little bit because I've forgotten actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, Henry Ford is credited with developing, and this all ties to radio because it's the way that we view progress
and that, yeah.
And the way we try to sanitize our history. How you doing, Linda Francine? When you become a very powerful guy, you get a big platform. And 1 out of every 2 cars in the world by the late 1920s was a Ford.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. Ford plant in Yokohama, Japan, Ford plants in the UK, Ford plants in the United States. 1 out of every 2 cars was a Ford.
Yeah. Well, he derived the old mass production, didn't he? He was the first person to actually mass-produce cars.
He developed that concept of standardization and also, you know, a more functional. The assembly line had been. It's another one of those things that we think Henry Ford woke up one day, and while sitting on the crapper, just hey, I'll just create an assembly line. You know.
I think they had a time and motion man, didn't they? They employed a time and motion man.
They had time and motion people. They had broken down processes in factories to, you know, to make them more efficiency. They understood the flow across the factory floor, right? They understood that things had to move. You couldn't have things creating a big X on factory floors, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Or you'd lose efficiency, right? Everybody had to be gone the same direction, right? Everybody had to be pulling towards the outdoor of the factory. Right, Harvey?
That's right.
You just could not have a willy-nilly, you know, people just crossing each other's paths all day. So everybody moved in the right direction. So Henry Ford just made that mechanized, that whole process with the overhead conveyor system that would drop down parts where they were needed on the assembly line. And everything was all good until the 1920s. And then Ford became very wealthy. I think even in 1931, his income was $30 million, which is probably the equivalent to like $600 million today. A huge, huge income.
Easy.
But then Henry Ford veered off course in the 1920s. And he started to, he had a newspaper that was distributed. It was called the Dearborn. I can't remember what the hell it was. The Dearborn Record or something like that, because he was headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan. And all the Ford dealers were required to buy subscriptions and have it in their offices. Thank you, Lisa. And then he started to take it in his mind to dissect history on his own way, and he started to turn his eyes towards Judaism. And he published over the next couple of years a really series of unfortunate articles laying a lot of the world's ills on Judaism.
No, that's right. Yeah, now I remember.
Yeah. To the extent, and you wonder where Adolf Hitler had got some of his ideas. Well, I'm almost ashamed to say that some of those ideas came from the mind of Henry Ford in some of his writings, because in early pictures you can see of Adolf Hitler in his office. He has copies, translated copies were widely distributed in Germany.
Yeah, that's right.
And Hitler had a picture of Henry Ford, publisher of the Dearborn, whatever the hell the name of it was, and studied him extensively, his writings on that. This is sometimes the ill effect. This is the way that we sanitize our history. I mean, Hitler was an absolute rock solid admirer of Henry Ford.
You know what? I wonder how many people out there don't realize what Volkswagen means. It means people's car. That's what you call it, the people's car, the Volkswagen. in German, obviously. Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Volkswagen? Yeah, people's car. I bet a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And, you know, Hitler was certainly not directly involved, but certainly very proud of a people's car, you know, over there. But it's fascinating. This is what I mean about inventors and people like that, that we, you know, I mean, let me see if I have this thing, Harvey, that talks a little bit about, but anyway, Ford's fame kind of went down because he was the first one that took the assembly line, and he started to speed that up. You know, because your job was to keep pace with the guy that was passing the material on to you, right, Harvey? You could not have a backup of material that you had to handle at your station. You had to keep the flow going. You know, if you were slower than the guy to your right that or left that was passing material to you, what would happen? That shit would start to pile up at your station. And what would happen? The boss man would come down the line and he would say, "What's the problem?" "Well, I can't." You didn't want to. What would you say? "I can't keep up with the guy that's passing the material to me." So Ford would have these hand-picked people that would be at the beginning of important processes on the line. They were called jackers or something like that. And these were people that could do work at phenomenal rate. Yeah. And they were secretly paid a little more. So when they talk about speeding up the line, they didn't mean that the actual shit was coming down faster on the line. They just meant that material was being processed in the building of the car faster, because these guys would be at the beginning of an important process, these jackers, and they would work super fast, and the next guy down the line suffered for that because he had to then increase his speed to keep up with the jacker, and then the next guy had to keep up. And if you couldn't keep up the speed, guess what? You were out the door. Henry Ford would come to you and say, "Hey, look, today I think we counted there's 357 people in the parking lot waiting for your job."
Yeah, especially in that era.
Especially when you got into the late, you know, when car sales went off in the Depression and all that. And, you know, the Ford plant shut down for, I think, 18 months to retool for the Model A. But I only use Henry Ford as an example of how we grow up with a very sanitized, you would have never heard in elementary school about Henry Ford's thoughts on Judaism as a catalyst for ills of the world. And then, of course, later he published a retraction and, you know, apologized to people. But by then, the reputation is damaged. Yeah. That's why I'm still, to this day, you'll see that most Jewish people do not buy Lincolns. They tend to buy Cadillacs, things like that, because there's still a little bit of that hangover legacy, that generational little payback for Henry Ford for the 1920s for getting involved in politics. Very fascinating. But let me tell you this about. Let me get this to you, because you're fascinated by radio. You're fascinated by Tesla. Yep. These people. And I'm going to read you a little bit here. If I can get this thing up.
No, I made about a month ago. I made a Tesla coil. Brilliant.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm going to build a bigger one there and produce, I don't know, probably about 40,000 volts. So I just got to be careful what I'm doing, you know, because I'm going to build a huge one, massive one. Yeah.
Now, Tesla himself began working for a phone company in Budapest. Okay, and then according to this, in 1882, he headed to Paris, and he was hired by the Continental Edison company over there, because Edison was worldwide by the 1880s. I mean, he was known. He was the most internationally known inventor. And one of his supervisors wrote a letter of recommendation for Tesla to go work with Edison in his factories or in his laboratories in New Jersey there. And his supervisor wrote a letter praising Tesla. Tesla showed up at Edison's door with the letter. And, you know, Edison thought that he was a brilliant well-educated kid, but his ideas, all of his ideas were very impractical.
That's right. Didn't like none of his ideas, did he?
Didn't like any of his ideas. And it says here is what I said. Edison relied heavily on the tedious wash, rinse, repeat. Try this experiment, try this, try 1,000 different things to make that light bulb, that cathode to burn. And Tesla was like, hey man, let's put brain power on this. Why should we take a light bulb and stick elephant dung inside of it and see how?
I think he tried everything, didn't he? He tried human hair, he tried carbon, he tried all
carbon, bamboo. I mean, he sent people all over the continents to harvest materials to try for this light bulb. And people like Tesla were just dumbfounded watching Edison do this shit. Today's shipment would bring, coconut husks from South Pacific, or, Madagascar cocoa fiber hulls, or so. It's like he just sit there like shaking his head, like, what the fuck is coming in today? So he did not like that broad shotgun approach to the way that you solve problems. He liked a very targeted. Let's think about the burning of material. Okay, let's think about carbonization and what happens when you put electricity into something, right? Let's study that. Let's try to get it on a chemical molecular level to sort of understand that part of it, okay? So you can understand, Harvey, it probably didn't even take but a week or two, but Tesla's just pacing the floor like, Jesus, what did I get myself into? Down here, I'm working with this. He probably thought to himself, I'm working with this clown, it's sleeping 4 hours a night, pissed off a lot of the time.
We had to do Tesla because when Edison booted him out the company, Tesla started laying cables down Wall Street, because that's what they were doing, digging up all the roads and burying cables down. And he actually did that job for a while.
Yep. Oh, he had to do that. Yeah. I mean, Linda says, Rosie, why do you think Edison was so unsystematic? I think it was because he wasn't a scientist. So he didn't come to things from a fear. That's exactly correct. He had no textbook routine. When you're trained in scientific things, like to be a chemist or an electrician, you're trained in certain laboratory procedures and certain way to approach things from a very theoretical Teslean point of view, whereas Edison looked at things from an earthly point of view. He would, right, Harvey, he would look at something and he would look at a vacuum tube with something inside that glowed and say, okay, we got our first toe hold here. We got something that glows. Now all we need to do is find which thing is going to glow longest and be cleanest in this bulb. Whereas I said before, like Tesla would take that more scientific textbook approach to say it's the burning itself that we have to understand, not the material. Once we understand the process of how something burns in a vacuum tube, well, maybe we can chemically create something that will do that. But you cannot detract from the fact that in his zillions of experiments, Edison, they say even a blind pig gets in trouble once in a while. And he stumbled onto the Edison effect, which was the base, which was genius. It's the only thing that Thomas Edison ever discovered in his life by accident. Everything else was just by sheer work, determination, movie studios, moving pictures, phonograph. Some of the other stuff that he worked on, it was just sheer bullwork. Hundreds of ideas flowing out of his mind.
Tesla had this great idea of giving all the masses free energy, because that's why he constructed a massive Tesla coil. I can't remember exactly where it was.
I think it was in New York. I think it was out on Long Island or something, Harvey, or Staten Island, that big fucking Tesla coil.
So what you had to do was transmit electricity to the masses wirelessly.
Yeah, just using that same, but the Earth is not a vacuum, right? So that was a big part of the issue there. But Linda was saying, like, the thing I like the way they put it here, Tesla was a dreamer with engineering training, but he was able to work out theories in his mind without having to physically test them. You know, like I don't have to try camel shit dried in this light bulb to understand that it's not going to work. But he had to sit there and watch Edison do it. You know, this was the difference between a classically trained mind that could do that and understand and make that leap and be confident in the result of that. And they said Tesla was a germaphobe, right? He washed his hands constantly. Yeah. He was always.
I'm a bit like that.
He looked like a fashion plate for GQ magazine. He was very dapper.
Yeah.
He used 17 towels a day to take care of his cleaning. And he had an aversion to women wearing earrings. I mean, there was all kinds of anybody that's touched by genius is often, you know, they have these little foibles and these little weird. Hello, Vanessa. Nice to see you, sweetheart.
I'm not like that. I'll tell you what. Ever heard of the USS Eldridge?
Yeah, the Eldridge experiment or something.
Right. And you know the experiment. What they're trying to do? They're trying to make the warship invisible to radar, and apparently the idea came from Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
And what they did, they applied massive amounts of energy. They had these massive coils of wire around the ship, and it actually worked. But apparently, that film, if you ever seen the Philadelphia experiment, the ship actually, I don't know, they opened up some sort of wormhole, and the ship went into the future. It sort of, I don't know, it disappeared into the future. So apparently, they created some sort of time vortex.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Hey, Classic, how you doing? Classic Computers in the house. Nice to see you.
You know what happened? I'll tell you what happened, right? When Tesla died in New York, immediately the CIA seized all his papers, every single one of them, because he had these ideas of creating a time vortex, you see. And I reckon the CIA, somewhere, they've got some sort of installation and they're already traveling through time. Remember that series in the 60s, the time stuff? Yeah. I'm sure they've got something like that already, because Tesla apparently.
The only thing you have to do is see if it's theoretically possible in your mind. Practical application and development is a different story. But if it's theoretically possible, if you can imagine it and it theoretically works in your mind, then you only have the problem of working out how to do it in practical life. You know what I'm saying? There's the engineering. There's the engineering part, to take the practical, theoretical, and turn that into a physical reality. That's where Thomas Edison was, you know, he just looked at the end result. I need light. Let's start burning some shit in tubes and let's just see what works best. Yeah. You know, it's just, it was a different approach, but it's the New York Times interview, said that Edison had no hobby. He had no amusement of any kind.
No.
Okay. And he lived in utter disregard of the most elementary rules of hygiene. So this guy was a goat in the laboratory. You can imagine, no air conditioning, summertime, New Jersey, right? And the goats walking around the lab. Right?
You know what? I'll tell you what I read, all right? Tesla, one of his papers, he actually was experimenting one day and he nearly died. He nearly electrocuted himself. But he was experimenting some huge, massive Tesla coils in his laboratory. And for one instant, he actually saw the past, the present, and the future all in one go. See, so the theory is that all of time, past, present, and future, all exists now at this moment, but they're just in different dimensions.
Yeah.
Rod's gone quiet.
I'm just reading ahead, but everybody knows the war of the currents, the AC versus DC. But you have to remember, Edison had his prestige and his reputation tied.
That's right.
To direct current. So you would fight to, this was the failing of Edison, that his ego was so enlarged by all the aggrandizement of the laboratory in Menlo Park and all of his inventions, that he could never back away from something that he, you know, that he was the father of. You know, he could never say a superior technology had come along. It took a guy named George Westinghouse to come along and recognize the brilliance of Tesla's AC, and then to go up to the Niagara Falls and build a generating station that actually used alternating current to provide massive quantities of electricity. That see, some people are smart in a business way, Harvey. Some people are smart in a theoretical, scientific way. Some people are smart in terms of dogged determination. But who's the guy that's always going to make the bucks on it? It's going to be the guy that has the business brain that says, you two guys fight it out over there. Tesla, I'm going to buy your shit. You boys continue with your fighting it out. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to build this plant and see if this shit works. And Westinghouse made a freaking fortune.
Right. It's like the battle between them, isn't it? Between Tesla and Edison. I mean, Tesla said, look, the way to go is AC power. And Edison would say, no, DC power, because AC is too dangerous. That's why they electrocute the damn elephant, just to show how dangerous it was.
Well,
you know?
Like I said at the beginning, they would also put Edison the Edison Power Company, generator company, would take out massive advertisements in newspapers showing artist conceptions of, you know, in one of them, a guy walking down the street home and steps in a puddle and gets electrocuted by some mysterious, well, because AC got him. You know, it got loose in the ground through the carrying system and shorted out. And this poor bastard stepped in it, or the horse-drawn cart. The horse just falls over in his sleep. It falls over dead because it got a massive AC. You know, this stuff scared the shit out of people. It was no slam dunk. You know, because why? Because Edison had a lot of. Take care, Feed Me Seymour. Edison had a lot of, you know, prestige accumulated. He had a lot of goodwill of capital and common sense behind him that we later knew was, ill placed on that. But there's no doubt, as we wrap up and we talk about exploring vintage radio in this very first hangout, that Edison made the keystone, although he had no idea of the practicality of it. He made the first seminal discovery of what we call the Edison effect. It became the basis for rectification of currents, allowing an AC source to be turned into direct current. And it also allowed for the development of the amplification tube, which instead of having to use massive power supplies to keep signals going in telegraphy, telephones, that you were able to use vacuum tubes to amplify signals and have much more efficiency and much more ability to carry great distances. This really was and is, and maybe you'll bury me out, Harvey, this really is the very basis of radio, early radio, right here.
That's right.
And the ability to take an idea of transmitting something through the air.
I'll tell you what's funny as well, because really, when you think about it, Marconi, he only basically refined the radio, because the first person to demonstrate the transfer of electromagnetic energy was someone called Oliver Lodge. And that was demonstrated in, it's some sort of scientific community place in London somewhere. I can't remember where it is now. But what he'd done, he had a gigantic induction coil. And what he did, he transmitted a spark from the coil to a ring, just a ring of wire. And he had to turn down all the lights in the auditorium wherever to see this tiny, minute spark that was transmitted across the air. And really, basically, it was like Heinrich Hertz, who was another one, who was experimenting with wireless, transmitting electricity wirelessly. And Marconi picked up on that, and he just refined everything. He refined all the process completely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking also, when you think about, But just the Edison effect. Think of the manufacture of vacuum tubes, what you call valves there. And of course, in the UK, you had the mother of all quality.
Roulade.
Yeah, what we call Mullard here, the mother of all high. Everybody's dream is to have Mullard tubes from the UK due to the high quality of the exceptional quality of manufacture of them. But think, Harvey, when they make that vacuum tube, they've got to get all of that gas and all of that. They got to make it totally pure. It's not enough to just pump out the vacuum. So they take that thing, they put a little thing that's called a getter in the top of that, a little thing on the inside that when you put that inducted, the induction coil on the outside of it, it fires that getter up on that energy is transmitted right through the glass, right into the tube, and it heats up that getter, and that does the final cleaning of all the impurities inside of that vacuum tube. That's like you were saying, you'd be surprised the amount of power that can be moved through the air, when you,
amazing.
It's amazing. So when you talk about the Philadelphia experiment and all that, you can understand why they might have thought something like that. Take care, Joe. Hope you enjoyed the broadcast today. This was the first in what's going to series, and I'm going to ask Harvey to be my co-host on these.
Brilliant. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Because we both have a passion for what's sitting behind us. And I think next we'll cover off, some of the early attempts at radio and the development of some of the first, the birth of the national broadcasting, NBC. Where did the tone come from? Ding, ding, ding. There's all kinds of fascinating history that people don't know about on early radio. And then we'll build up to how you create, which to me is the most mind-blowing thing at Harvey, is the way that they solve broadcasting stereo over the air and being coded, decoded, and
multiplex coders that to use afterwards. Initially, as you know, the two frequencies for left and right channels were transmitted on two adjacent frequencies. Yeah.
Well, just to give you a preview of coming attractions, this unit here, this is the Fisher 800B. It's actually the pride of my collection here. And let me just turn this light. I have a little supplemental light here. Turn that down a bit. And the thing that was unusual, Harvey, just to give you guys a little taste of how brutal this was in terms of development. It wasn't until like 1961 or something that a guy that worked for Zenith Electronics was able to develop the first true stereo broadcast receiver. Okay, he got a big award. He died a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact. But you don't always have stereo like you had it today. It was so simple. Back then, you had a unit that was made by Fisher in New York City here. And this has two separate, it's like two radios in one. It has an AM radio and an FM radio.
Yeah.
And if you were going to listen to a stereo broadcast, the only thing you could listen to was called synthesized or contrived stereo. They would tell you, like tonight at the Metropolitan or at the Met, they're going to have an opera tonight. If you want to listen to it, you have to turn your AM dial to, let's say, you have to turn your AM dial. They would say like the 810 AM. Now turn your FM dial to like 101.9 FM, and your radio, your receiver will actually take that AM and FM signal, two separate signals, and combine that into one stereo signal to come out. What an inefficient thing, Harvey, to have. So this is one of the big milestones in the development of radio here. And of course, they didn't solve that. When I was a kid, there was no broadcast stereo. It was unheard of.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was 4 years, really 3-4 years old that practical. We never had stereo until about 1962 and 1963.
That's right. I remember the first tuner I bought. It was one of the first ones with a multiplex decoder in it.
But it's just fascinating when you think of it. When you think of, and y'all can do this. This is your homework assignment. Think about this while we get ready to wrap this up today. Think about this. When you listen to a radio station, and let's say here you have KZST, which is 100.1 on the FM dial. You're turning that knob to that specific frequency to hear that transmission. But yet, you hear that in stereo. You have an A channel that comes out of one side, and you have a B channel that comes out of the other. The vexing problem for the engineers was how in the hell, and I said this at the beginning, how in the hell do you get two separate channels out of one broadcast frequency?
Yeah.
Well, they did this very inefficient way with this unit. Well, we'll broadcast one half of the stereo on AM and we'll put the other half on FM. Well, guess what happened when Dad went in to use the shaver or Mom made a cake and turned the mixer on?
Yeah, bad interference.
Bad interference. And there goes your night at the opera, right?
That's it.
The neighbor upstairs is vacuuming or something. You're like, holy shit! You're throwing shit at the ceiling. Stop it! I'm listening to the opera. You bastard! Stop doing that up there. So it's very interesting to think of some of the problems that these.
It's a bit weird though, when you think about it, isn't it? Mixing amplitude modulation with frequency modulation signals.
Yeah. Well, they started experimenting with subcarrier, and they looked at harmonics. They looked at all kinds of. It's just there's a lot of fascinating parts to radio. I'll leave on this. We'll talk about this, Harvey. And the thing that really blows me away is you think about a high school education today, okay, and you think about. I don't know about you guys. I'm appalled by the state. I'm appalled by
pretty poor.
I'm appalled by the products of education today. I'm not blaming teachers. I'm not blaming teachers. I'm not blaming parents. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole of that stuff. But what I'm going to tell you, there's no denying that the education in the 1950s up until about 1975 was a superior educational model.
Yeah, took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, exactly.
Because it's there you go. Yeah, well, Linda, you know what I'm saying? I went to a polytechnic. I went to a high school that was an engineering high school. Okay, I mean it was all geared to engineering. I mean you could skip your first year of college.
It's the same school I went to actually, because the actual grammar school I went to a grammar school, and that was one of the first schools in the area we had a terminal. The old teletype ASR 33s. I had one of these here until about 4 years ago, and I sold it for about $1,000, something like that. And we had one of those connected to a mainframe at the University of London. And we used to actually play our very, very first games, like car race games.
Keep talking for a minute, Harvey. Keep going.
Yep. Yeah, so, as I said, this was back in 1973. We had a terminal called a teletype. You remember those teletypes, like these electric typewriters, you type something in and they type back. And we used to play these basic little games, pick a car, what color car you want. I had to pick a red one or whatever, blue one, and then you had to type in a speed, 50 miles an hour, and it comes back. And that was the first. Yeah, you remember those, Linda? Wow. Yeah. And that was the first time I ever experienced using a computer. So that was way back in '73, because my college I went to, or high school, I suppose you say, in the States. It was all science orientated. Even our houses are, I don't know if you got houses in the States, but each section, they split the school into 4 different houses, and one of them was Stevenson House, one of them was Kelvin House, the other one was Newton House, and Faraday. And each house was named after prominent scientists. So that's where our college was. That's why we had the very first terminal connecting to a mainframe computer, and we had all the science labs as well. So it was really sort of all really science orientated, the place I went to. That's why.
That's good. And yeah. How old are you, Harvey?
Are you same age as you, Rosie?
Are we? Are we really?
Yeah, you're a few months older than me.
Okay, so we're a bunch of old crows.
Yes, we are.
Flying around.
Oh, you look great, Rosie. Look how great you look. Look at you. Wow. I noticed actually when you stood up.
Let's talk turkey. This Harvey. I'm not going to allow you to say good things about me on here. When
you stood up and you walked towards the wall of sound, I could see your waist now, the way it actually tapers in.
Yeah.
It's made a hell of a lot of difference, I must admit.
Yeah, I mean I'm kind of, when I see myself, and I just think it really is, I'm happy it is the female form and all that now. So I'm very happy. I'm happy with my results. But let's get back to this, Harvey. Because I fear for the creativity of the world.
Wow. Oh, Rosie. Whoa.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm not Linda Francine. I'm not going to be one of these. I mean, I could say a lot about parenting. I could say a lot about teaching. I could say a lot about greed. I could say so many different things about where we stand today in terms of education. But my working career is done. I've spent 46 years of working, and all I have seen is a tremendous degradation of a degrading of skill sets of people. And now we come to a point where social media is the real currency of success, and the need, the ability to even think creatively, I fear, is being so stunted in the world today with the things that people care about in the direction and the poor educational backgrounds. I mean, I want to hold this up as an example, and the date on this is September 25th, 1974. And this was, I went to a school called Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. It was like an engineering school. And we had things called mechanical drawing. Most of you weren't even born in 1974. I know we had mechanical drawing, and I'm thinking to myself, every time I see this, I get blown away when I see this. And I don't know how 14 years old or whatever.
Yeah, you know what? I see stuff like that.
Take a look at that. I mean, take a look at that. And you know what I got on this? I got like a freaking C on that, because the standards were so damn high, and that there was no dumbing down. Look at all the marks that the teacher corrected things that the average person would look at that and they, oh wow, that's a 14-year-old that and this is nothing compared. I can't find my globe valve that I had, but cross section of a globe valve. No. But I think of what kids come out of school with today. Listen to this, Harvey. I went to a junior high school, PS 233. It was a shithole. Okay, I mean, I was lucky I went to this place. But I took typing in 9th grade. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. 10th grade, I had wood shop. Okay.
Yeah, all the things we used to do. That's funny. That
second half of the year, I had sheet metal shop. We're making ventilators.
Yeah.
For rooftops.
Yeah.
We're making ventilators that they look like the circle on top with the little cap on it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
For rooftops. Then in 11th grade, we're into hot metal shop. Okay. Yeah. We're forging. We're using a hot forge.
with the blow lamps and stuff like that, forging. Yeah, we used to do that as well. Yeah. Yeah.
We're doing casting.
Yeah.
Casting with bronze and brass. Unbelievable.
I know.
Can you imagine? I mean, the fucking lawyers and the liability of having casting in a high school or
safety. Can you imagine?
now I'm really gonna horrify you. In senior year of high school, besides engineering laboratory and we had what was called machine shop.
Yeah.
Where you would, by the time you were done senior year, you were a certified lathe operator on a engine lathe, producing nuts and bolts and knurled fittings and and mil spec precision, military specification precision parts when you're not even 18 years of age.
Incredible, huh?
And I think today, with the knowledge I had, I was able to work as a carpenter, a framing carpenter, pay my way through college, and do construction, do all the own remodel on my own home, pull all the electric, all the plumbing, all the concrete work, all the tile work.
I know, you're brilliant. You can do it. You can do it all yourself. It'll cost you a fortune otherwise.
Everything except the roofing. Because I'm not gonna, I repaired roofing and fixed a lot of rotten damage, but I'm not gonna take up learning how to, I want a roof done right. It's critical, right? Some things you got to know when to hold.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting when I look at the fact that I came out of high school and it was so freaking rigorous. Do you know what my average we laugh at Marshall because Marshall says, "Hey, I was a 2.0." My GPA was 2.0.
Yeah.
I mean, we laugh at that. I'm lucky I was like C plus. Because the standards were so high and they continued to be high through college that when I hit the real world, man, it just felt like shit went easier and went downhill and got easier. Because the level of performance that the high school that they demanded had been like the Marine Corps. We were so tough and ready for the world. It was like, oh, is that it? Is that all? You could work. You could go to work every day. You didn't have to call in. You had a work ethic because it'd been beaten into you at that high school that nobody got passed along just for the sake of moving people along from grade to grade. I mean, you could be Jethro Bodine and 29 years old and still sitting in 12th grade. Okay.
I'll tell you what gets me here in this country, all right? People come out of high school, you know what they do? They can't be bothered looking for work. They go and sign on. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm telling you. So I'm just saying, college for me was just a finishing school. Let's be real. Most everything you learn at real value, you learn in high school.
Exactly.
Actually, it's like a reverse. It's like an upside down. It's like a pyramid. That first elementary, I should say, you learn a lot of critical shit. I mean, if you don't read, if you're not taken in hand early and a good reader, you're going to have problems, foundationally. But college is just a finishing. There's nothing new that you really learn in college. It's just a finishing school. For life, for getting along in an adult world. But I'll tell you.
Put it this way, I mean, the terminal we had, the teletype we had connected to the University of London mainframe computer. Now, if it wasn't for me using that, I wouldn't have probably even gone into the computer field, so.
Well, Harvey, I'm going to tell you a funny story. I'm an old crow, okay? In our high school in Baltimore had the very first mainframe computer in a high school in the city of Baltimore. Okay. It was like people would come from, every corner of Virginia, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania to come and take a look at this thing. It was a digital equipment deck. Okay. Deck. Okay.
Yeah.
It took up a room that was about 30 feet wide It had its own air-conditioned little comfort house.
Yeah, just for the equipment, not for the workers.
You know, it was like the Great fucking Oz behind us. You could look at it. You could look at it back there. Okay, it was all glass walls in front of it, and you just saw from floor to ceiling, from floor to ceiling. And we had computer class, you know, and we would go into computer class, and we all had these little stations at our desk. They were called IBM. They were called punch card stations. Okay.
Yep.
And
I've worked with all of that. 78.
You would sit down at your seat, and they would tell you, today we're going to learn how to add 2 + 2. Well, you know, I mean, it's not, you know, I'm sitting there like, okay, you know, whatever. I'm thinking about the chick I'm going to be going out with tonight. I'm not thinking about 2 + 2. But you would get down there, and to do this function, Harvey, you had to produce a stack of cards about a ½ an inch thick. These punch cards kicked out the end, and then you put it into the feeder, the hopper of the deck.
And then it's get screwed up randomly, and then we have to find the right card and punch it manually and put it back in the right order.
Well, the great deck would start, the lights would start to flash and whirl, and everybody's standing, you know, looking at this. You know, it's everything except the curtain, right? I'm the great and powerful Oz. Yeah. And I was thinking to myself then, that day, you know, and that doing that course, I thought, holy shit, if you got to sit here and do this to add 2 + 2, you know what my conclusion was, Harvey? There's no fucking future in this computer.
I'll tell you what, it's funny though, because you're right about that. You know, my first computer job in mainframe operator was 1978. It was an English stockbroking firm in a place called London Wall. I don't know if you know London Wall at all, near Broad Street Station, Liverpool Street, just around the corner from there. And I remember going in there, and they were asking me, "Oh, can you load a tape?" Because I went on a course, you know, mainframe computing course before that. And yeah, I got the tape, and I loaded it all up, and lifted up the head cover, loaded the tape up, whatever. Then I had to load paper up and in the line printer machine. And then we had these big disc packs. They were called EDS60s. Where you put it into the, you open up the lid, you put the disc pack in, twisted it around, lifted up the cover. And those were the beginnings of a hard drive, if you see one. Yeah. It's like record platters stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, I just remember being very underwhelmed by the whole computer experience.
Yeah.
Early on. But I did have an Apple IIe.
I've got one.
Yeah.
I've got one. Yeah.
Bam, 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 bam. I remember the way it would write on the drive and the noise it would make. But I'm feeling.
I've got a demonstration one there. I'll have to do a live demo one because I've got the disk drives, the original monitor, and everything. I'll have to do one.
Yeah, you should do a hangout and just
I think I will, yeah.
Demo that. But I'll tell you, I'm fearful when I think of, you know, when people would come in for a job and they would write on a job application and every other word is misspelled, and it's kind of frightening to me, you know, where in my, you know, you had a sort of a work ethic that you didn't always have to get along with the boss, but at least you were kind of respectful. But these days, if a kid has a disagreement with the boss, he doesn't even bother engaging the boss anymore. He just takes his apron or whatever, where the hell he works, just crumple it up, throw it in the corner, and just walk out the door. And the boss comes back, "Hey, did you see Johnny around?" "Yeah, Johnny quit." It's like, what the fuck, you know? He didn't even bother. He just walked out the damn door.
Wendy was just saying, sorry, Wendy was just saying on the side chat, she's got a Sinclair Spectrum. I'll tell you what, you wouldn't believe how many computers I've got here. I think I've got the entire history of personal computers in his house. I've got the very first IBM PC. He didn't even have a hard drive. He had 2 floppy disk drives. One of them had the DOS operating system, disk operating system on one drive, and the other one was for the data. And I've got one of those. I've got Apple IIs. I've got Sinclair Spectrums. I've got
anyway, open a museum, Harvey. Just capitalize.
The room, I would, yeah. I really need to sell them all. I'm gonna get rid of them all.
You can hire Linda Francine to be your curator and over there take care of all that. And I'll be your marketing branch on that. But I'm going to tell you what, guys, it's been a good hangout. It went much better than I thought it would today. It's been stellar. Harvey, I think we really laid down the roots of modern radio, or what we know as radio. Today, in the next one, we're going to cover the early practical days, some of the broadcasting, early attempts at broadcasting. How did the government cope with this? You know, World War I came about. Thank you, Jinxie. Love you, honey. World War I came about. And
during World War II, you know, the BBC, they had to stop transmitting TV signals because they're worried about the Nazi pilots locking onto the radio frequencies.
You get that exactly. Yeah, I'm going live tonight. It's going to be a late one. It's going to be Marilyn and Rosie Part 2 tonight. I'm going to be back, and I can't promise
you, Rosie, my time.
Yeah, it's late. You got to get your beauty sleep there, Harvey.
Oh, yeah, I need it as well.
Yeah. And be on Marilyn and Rosie a little bit tonight. I don't know if Bergs will be on, but you know, Harvey's a lot of fascinating things. You know, when government gets involved in technology, and when government gets fearful in wartime, and they start to seize everything that they can get their hands on and appropriate that for the, you know, how did companies cope with that? You know, when the Marconi Corporation, when the United States seized all of the assets of the Marconi Wireless Company here, you know, there's all kinds of fascinating history. How did the National Broadcasting Company get born? You know, where does that tone come from? Ding, 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 right? And all that kind of fascinating stuff that we can delve into, and how Harvey, I'm going to let you explain how simplified a radio actually works, from the acquisition of signal through the intermediate frequency, through the RF, and right through the amplification, and right out the back door.
Okay, yeah, well,
we're gonna let you. So you better come with a diagram.
Right. Okay. What now? You want me to do it now? Is it now?
Okay. Harvey's my unpaid teaching assistant.
Well, let's say all modern day receivers, as you know, they receive an electromagnetic wave, and that's picked up by an antenna, which can be a length of wire. Okay, and that goes into, let's say basic. If you're going to build a basic crystal set, they're not called crystals anymore. They use diodes. So the diode actually rectifies the AC signal that comes into a DC voltage. Then that goes into a variable capacitor that actually separates the different frequencies, and then it goes into a pair of headphones. That is a basic radio receiver.
Yeah, and then just adding electrolytics just gives some oscillation and some, you know, some signal differentiation and some other.
Oh, I've got the coil. Sorry, I forgot the coil as well. I've got the coil.
Well, you know, because of the oscillating frequencies of charging and discharging, that action of an electrolytic capacitor for, you know, very, very important for. Well, we'll cover all that stuff up. Yeah. This is not going to be a technical overview. There might be one section that'll be very technical when we tear into stereo broadcast through the open air, because believe me, this was the most enormously vexing problem. Like I say, when I was, up until I was 4 years old, there was no such thing as stereo broadcasting on true stereo like we have today. There was a contrived stereo through a unit like that. So,
I remember my dad, he had a radiogram, and all he could receive was FM, but that was it. No stereo.
Man, I wasn't born that many years after the Wright brothers were flying.
When I think about it, holy shit, when I think about it, the Second World War ended. No, sorry, I was born 13 years after the Second World War. Holy shit.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, Harvey. When you start thinking about it, you get horrified some nights you're late and you're like, let's see. I lived through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the thousands, the tens. I'm coming up to. You're like, holy fuck! I'm running out of fingers on it. I'm gone.
Yeah, because your birthday is the same year as mine, exactly.
There's Sharon B. Loved your hangout today. You know what I mean? So I laugh about that, Harvey. Us old crows will go on forever. You know, no problem.
I hope you're right. I want my telegram from the Queen. When you're 100, you get a telegram from the Queen.
Wow.
You know?
Wow. Really?
Hopefully, maybe.
Well, it might be a king, but probably be a king by then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you want one from the Queen when you're 100. That'll mean that she's like 190 or something.
Oh my God, yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know. She don't want to give up, does she?
Yeah, I hear you, Linda. Yeah, same kind of thing, you know. But yeah, I want to congratulate Missy Jenn on her first hangout today. Thank you for moderating that for her, Harvey.
No worries. You done really well. It's fantastic. Very good.
Hi, Joey. How you doing?
Yeah, it was very good. The only thing I didn't was somebody. I think somebody mentioned a couple of things in German, which I missed. Something a little bit, well, not good. I don't know exactly what was said.
Well, this is and there'll be people that post things on a foreign language and then hope that somebody uses their translator to translate it. It's usually something very vicious on the side here. So I tell my mods, anything that's in a foreign language, just knock it out on
I turned around for about 2 minutes and I looked and I thought, oh shit, what was that?